Good afternoon, Mr. Krayden, and thank you very much for joining me on this week. How are you doing?
Been a busy week, Sammy, but always nice to pay you a visit.
Thank you. And let's begin. Like there are lots of things going on in this country. Particularly, we have an election, and then we also had a long verdict for Freedom Convoy, as both were found guilty on mischief. Like someone wrote on Twitter, like it cost like taxpayer, I think, $2 million for this case. It means it ended with just mischief. How do you see this verdict? And so, what can you tell us more about it?
Actually, it's more like 12 million,
It's
not
12
not
million.
two. And this trial went on for literally 1 year and 7 months, and it's not over yet because they still have to come back for sentencing. So
Mhm.
a year and a half plus. I was there on the first day on September 5th, 2023, and I was there for the verdict, which took an incredible 5.5 hours to deliver. I've never heard a longer verdict. At, and I suppose it was apropos because this was the longest mischief trial in Canadian history. There's no question about it. All of this for mischief. And I just kept shaking my head because I go back to what I said in the beginning. This trial should never have had to happen. There should
Mhm.
never have been an arrest. There should never have been charges laid. These people should never have spent any time in jail. They should not have been called off by the police, and they should never have had to come to Ottawa like 12 times over the last year and a half to do this. And I don't agree with the verdict. I think it could have been worse. I think the judge was generally fair throughout the trial, but I did not like the way she continually read one post from Chris Barber that he had put on TikTok where he was swearing quite a bit. And it was as if she was trying to suggest that Chris Barber was on a different level than Tamara Leach. And I really didn't like what I saw was an attempt to almost denigrate Chris Barber in this way and to depict him as somebody who really couldn't put a sentence together without foul language, which of course, and I've talked to Chris quite a bit. I interviewed him extensively in
Mhm.
February. He's a very articulate man. And although he just constantly refers to himself, I'm just a blue collar trucker and that's all I've ever been, he's a
Mhm.
very articulate man. He thinks about the problems in Canada. He thought a great deal about going out to Ottawa from his home in Saskatchewan to protest the COVID mandates.
Yep.
He understood it was going to be a potential sacrifice on his part, but he did it anyway. So I really felt badly for Chris on Thursday, and I'm certainly hoping that he avoids any kind of severe penalty when the sentencing day comes. And as for Tamara, but I'm pretty well sure the judge was signaling that there would be mitigating factors. She said that several times that there would be mitigating factors, and she actually referred to mitigating factors in reference to Chris as well. So I'm optimistic the sentencing will not be too severe. But as I said, I should never have come to this in the first place. And I understand the judge was under tremendous pressure. I'm not saying anybody told me that, but I can fully comprehend she would be
Mhm.
given the political atmosphere and environment in Ottawa and in our judicial system. So I understand the dynamics, but I was not happy with the verdict. And I have to say, and I don't want to go on too long about this, but
Mhm.
two two consequences. First of all, it's a two-tier justice system. If you're out there protesting Israel,
Mhm.
well, you're probably not going to get into too much trouble. And we've seen
Yep.
that. And once again, I have no problem with people protesting Israel. I'm
Yep.
not 100% comfortable with what Israel's doing in
Doing.
Gaza.
Yes.
But you can't go occupy buildings and you can't block streets for in the whole day. And yet they do that and they're completely absolved of any arrest or charges. And certainly none of it ever comes to a trial.
Mm-hmm.
And they're doing, as far as I'm concerned, a lot worse than what went on with the Freedom Convoy and these
Yep.
two individuals. So
Yes.
it's a two-tier justice system. But secondly, if you want to really oppose woke legislation or progressive legislation or liberal legislation in this country, watch out because you're going to be potentially charged. You're going to be potentially put on trial. And even if you don't end up going to jail, or even if you don't even get convicted, do you really want to spend all that money? Because I mean, they spend a lot of their own money. They had to raise a lot of money. I don't know how much they're out of pocket. I don't know how much money they raised to pay for this. But do you really want to go through that? Because there's nothing more stressful. Well, there's probably only two things more stressful than going to court, and that's having a divorce or losing a loved one to death. It's probably number three in terms of stress,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nonstop, and you go to bed every night thinking about it.
Yep.
So if you want to go out and protest liberal policies, this is what happens to you. And I think it's a chill factor. It's a chill factor on free speech and free assembly, and that to me is the consequence here. And it was a very sad week. There's no other way to look at this. It's a sad week for Canada and for the Freedom Convoy because I think these people literally saved lives by allowing us to have the choice to take that vaccine or not.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah. So on that point, I need to ask you: do we have independent judiciary?
That's a very good question. I think we have a quasi independent judiciary. I don't believe it's completely independent because judges, the crown, the prosecutors are afraid of making the wrong decision and getting into potential trouble with the liberal government federally and provincially. I remind people that this was a provincial matter. It was in the
Mhm.
provincial court.
Yep.
So this was Doug Ford ultimately putting these people on trial. This was Doug Ford at any time, probably before the trial began, obviously, these charges could have been dropped. They could have been dropped. Doug Ford did not want these charges dropped. He wanted prosecution. He hated the Freedom Convoy. And as far as I'm concerned, he hates any free assembly that is not there assembling for him.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't believe, and I can't can I can I prove it? Not really, but I see it. I see evidence of the judiciary not being truly independent in this country, and that's dangerous.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, it is very sad, like to see like these people are going through this tough time. Yes, like I was saying, it is 2 million, but the correct amount is like 12 over $12 million. As you corrected me, thank you for that. I mean, like if you protest, you will pay the price, as you say. Like they knew it, what consequences they are going to pay for it, and now like until the charges will be or the sentences they will be sentences. The judge will announce the sentence near future, not yet, like whatever sentences they would receive. But this is not okay, as you said, like as you laughed on my question that do we have independent judiciary. But it seems like, like for last 10 years we never felt like we living in a first world country which is independent or democratic or whatever you name it, like in western world. and also like this COVID, like just thanks, we should be thankful to Freedom Convoy who took the a great initiative to force a liberal government to drop down these mandate. Otherwise, we may would go longer. Like they were dropped, I think, in 2022, but
Yep.
they could go longer than that. Yeah, okay. So like we, as you mentioned, like with respect to Doug Ford, it seems like Doug Ford is more like leaning toward a left wing party rather than being right wing. Like we they have also clashes with their federal counterpart. And so how would you see future of this Doug Ford government or PC government? Like like in 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 this full term, as they recently won their re-election. Do you see them in a good future, or it would be over after Doug Ford may would lose in the next election? In terms of this, you said like it was under it was in a provincial like court, so it was like those crown was asked by
Yeah.
like Ford government to prosecute these two people.
Well, for anything to happen, if the Doug Ford government is probably not going to win re-election because I mean it's just the odds are against that.
Yep.
But what I'm more concerned about is what happens to the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. I mean, I would like to see it completely destroyed and have a
Mhm.
truly conservative alternative. Problem is, the truly conservative forces in Ontario are divided against themselves.
Yep.
They've already got two parties, and that's going nowhere. That's
Hmm.
absolute stupidity. You're not going to take down a party that's been around for over 130 years in the province of Ontario, and that's been a dominant party in
Yep.
Ontario for much of
Hmm.
that period. When you've got your forces divided, so I would like to see a true conservative alternative build up some strength, but they're going to have to get their act together in the next 3 or 4 years to do that. Well, the next 3 years, you can't wait till the last minute.
Yep.
So it's a possibility. But I think we know that what happens when the party thinks all we have to do is put a real conservative in charge of the party and everything
Hmm.
will be okay. Well, Doug Ford originally masqueraded as a true conservative, and he
Yep.
turned out not to be. When the push came to shove, he was as bad as Justin Trudeau in many aspects. So the answer is not just to replace Doug Ford. And of course, he's been there now for what almost over a decade now, and he's not going to get another term. There's no point. There's no question about that. So I think we need a true conservative alternative in Ontario, but I don't see any hope for that right now.
Hmm.
And so it bothers me. But I'm disgusted with Doug Ford. I just every time I mention Doug Ford, it's as a phony faux conservative. I can't,
Hmm.
and I just can't forget what he's done over the last 4 years in terms of propping up Justin Trudeau and all of his authoritarian measures during the last 4 years.
Hmm. Yep. Okay. So let's jump to federal election, which is like almost like 3 weeks, I think.
3 weeks
Okay.
left.
Yep. So like like conservative dropped five candidates, and so far I think liberal dropped like two candidates, if I'm not wrong. So how would you see like these dropping the candidates, and the polls number are showing a different thing, like it seems like conservative are much behind. But like when Pierre Pouliot shows up in a rally, so we see like lineup of people, and what I think CBC was reporting that those mostly people come from, like from different cities, but that could not be the case. But let's first of all focus the dropping the candidate. I need to ask you, like, does or do these parties don't wait properly these candidates before nominating them?
Well, It's a good question. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, the candidate in Montreal was the right candidate. He did nothing wrong. And in fact, he reached out to me today. It's funny you should ask about this because I just responded to him and I said, "Why don't you come on my show next week?" Because
Mhm.
I defended him on my show. It's Stefan Marquis is
Yep.
his name. He's the guy running. He was running against Stephen Guilbeault, and he
Wow.
had a good chance. He had a good chance of winning.
Hmm.
And why was he kicked out? Well, something on social media. Well, if you look at his social media, he talks about the World Economic Forum. He
Yeah.
talks about the war in Ukraine being provoked by the expansion of NATO.
Mhm.
True.
Yeah.
It's fact. That's a fact. Of course it was. And I mean, it's not just me saying that. There's Professor John Mearsheimer from Chicago has made that quite clear. Professor Jeffrey Sachs from Columbia has documented that. These are people who are incredibly knowledgeable about the situation. It's not a conspiracy theory to suggest it had something to do with NATO expansion. Of course it did. And he suggested Bill Gates was making billions of dollars off the COVID vaccine. And of
That's
course he
correct.
is.
Yep.
Big Pharma is making billions off of this. So he did nothing wrong. So why was it wrong 2 weeks into the campaign? And I'm very, very suspicious about this, Sammy. I'm very suspicious because do they have somebody they want to parachute in there? Is it a friend of the campaign manager? I want to know this
Hmm.
because this is very suspicious to me. They don't have five candidates to lose.
Yes.
Even if even if you want to believe that Pierre Poilievre is tied with Mark Carney, and I don't believe he is, but even if you want to believe he doesn't have five seats to give away.
Yep.
He doesn't he can't do this because they need every possible seat. The deadline is fast approaching to replace these people.
Yep.
So are they going to keep finding people who said something they don't quite agree with?
Hmm.
And the guy from Western Ontario who was a comedian and he joked about public hangings,
Yeah.
it was a joke. It's
Yeah.
clear he's a comedian. And it's just it's the contempt for free speech from the Conservative Party. It really makes me wonder,
Mhm.
why I'm advocating that Pierre Poilievre win this election sometimes, because I'm very worried about what they're doing. I'm very concerned about their attitudes. I think their campaign was off the rails for a while, and I think Poilievre is literally moving it back on course
Mhm.
by force of will. But he's been getting terrible advice by
Yeah.
a communications staff and by a campaign manager named Jenny
Hmm.
Byrne. And he's getting bad advice from outside of the Conservative Party, from people like Corey Tenike, who ran Doug Ford's campaign. He's saying, go after Donald Trump, make it about Donald Trump, the worst advice possible. I think I said the last time we spoke,
Yeah.
there's an excellent column in the Hub by David Coletto, who runs Abacus Polling. David Coletto said, Pierre Poilievre had better get this right now.
Yep.
Stop going after Donald Trump. Stop making it about you versus Donald Trump. Start making it about change and the fact the liberals have screwed the country over for the last decade, and that you can do better. And if
Hmm.
he doesn't
Yep.
start focusing on change and the fact that Mark Carney doesn't make it all better, it is a terrible decade of drift. And if he doesn't do that, he is going to remain in trouble. And I know people keep telling me every day, well, look at the numbers of the rallies. Well, I'm sorry, you can't dismiss every poll. Every poll is
Yep.
not inaccurate. And when every poll has him 5% or more behind, it's trouble brewing. And I can tell you why. Because the NDP is
Not perfect.
collapsing and it's all going to the liberals. And to some extent, the bloc in Quebec is
Yes.
collapsing,
Yeah.
but that's going to the liberals. You know,
Yeah, yeah, this is extremely dangerous. But like, I need to ask you, like, as you mentioned, the Pierre Pouliot, like, campaign team, campaign manager, or a staff, like, are they the same people who were with Stephen Harper back in 2015?
that's very astute, Sammy, because a lot of people wouldn't remember that. Yes, they are the same people who tanked the Stephen Harper campaign in 2015. the longest election campaign in history, which was
Yep.
incredibly stupid.
Yep.
But it was also incredibly stupid to lead off with that slogan about he's just not ready, talking about Justin Trudeau. What an incredibly inane thing to say. Because when's he going to be ready? In 6 months or a year? What a stupid thing to say. It was the worst campaign slogan I've ever heard. But they tanked the campaign by making it all about Stephen Harper. Nobody else was allowed to share the stage with him. When he went to support MPs, they weren't allowed to stand with him.
Mhm.
Cabinet ministers were shut out of the campaign. It was Stephen Harper, Stephen Harper, Stephen Harper, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And it was a stupid strategy. And yeah, she's back. She's back, and she hasn't won a campaign in over 14 years. So
Mhm.
what the heck is she doing
Yep.
doing Poilievre's campaign? I have no idea what the idea is here. People are saying that she's very dictatorial. She's difficult to work with. It's either her way or the doorway. There's no argument. There's no dissension. There's no debate. So I don't know what she's doing there, but I do know it's becoming another disaster. Pierre Poilievre needs to take the campaign away from these people and get
Mhm.
back to what he was doing at the Axe the Tax rallies and start
Mhm.
talking about individual freedom, the government minding its own business, getting out of our lives, allowing parents to raise their children. These are things that resonate with people. And
Yep.
and the fact that you can make we're going to reduce your taxes by 15%. We're going to reduce regulations by 25%. We're going to make it a freer country, the freest on the earth,
Yep.
Paul Ev used to say. And
Mhm.
stop going on about Donald Trump. Stop going on about how you feel you're being boxed in by other issues. That's what he needs to do. And if Polyev does not cut himself loose from this dismal campaign, I think he's going to remain in trouble. And I do think he's in trouble right now. I'm not
Yep.
optimistic at the moment.
Yeah. So how do you predict like what would happen if Pierre Pouliot would lose another election? Like I mean, like conservative would lose another election and give the fourth term to the liberal. So should we expect another like referendum of independence of Quebec, maybe in Western Canada, particularly Alberta? Would we have another like thing like it would go like deeper like what we saw back in 2019 when conservative law, so there was a talk Alberta should be independent or exit, like western exit.
Yeah, there was some movement towards that.
Hmm.
There was a lot of movement towards that after uh, the last years of Pierre Trudeau, but that was all Brian Mulroney made that go away. And Preston Manning made independence go away because his slogan was the West wants in. I know I haven't seen Preston in years, but I knew Preston Manning very well when he was leader of the opposition. I was working in the House of Commons at that time. And very intelligent man, very bright man. I think he saved Canada from separation by making a political alternative. And he recently wrote in the Globe and Mail that if Carney wins, there's going to be a renewed focus on separation in the West. I think he's right.
Hmm. Yep.
And I think Danielle Smith has been talking about it, I think responsibly. She hasn't been stoking the fire. She's not out there saying, yeah, let's go, let's separate. Alberta needs to separate. She's been very circumspect about it, but she's acknowledged it's an obvious threat. And it will be, especially in Alberta. So I think we have to acknowledge it. I agree with Preston Manning. I don't agree with the Jason Kennys and the James Moores who are out there saying, "Oh, that's bad talk. That's
Hmm.
irresponsible talk to say that." Preston Manning shouldn't be saying that. Daniel Smith shouldn't be acknowledging the potential of separation. I disagree with that entirely. I think Preston's being entirely accurate in his assessment, and I think we need to consider that. But I don't know if this if we can turn this election around in time. I think it's entirely possible, though. I
Hmm.
do know we can if Polyev focuses on what he needs to focus. If he continues to fall into the liberal trap of becoming the guy who is somehow on Trump's side, even though he's constantly criticizing Trump. It's going to be problematic.
Hmm.
But I think the conservatives can still win this election, but they need to focus on how bad Carney is.
Yes.
And
Yep.
this is what kills me. Perfect example. This week, I guess it was this week, we had the liberals on the ropes over the Paul Chiang
Yep.
because here is a guy who was clearly beholden to China. He was encouraging people to turn his opponent in for cash, for a bounty. And Mark Carney said, "Hey, I don't think he said the right thing, but I've got no problem with this man. He's a man of integrity." And the people were shaking their heads, saying, "Wow, are you that much in China's pocket? Can't you can't just disqualify him? You had no problem disqualifying an Indo-Canadian in the
Yeah.
PN for
Hmm.
allegedly financial problems or whatever it was, or I can't remember. Was it financial problems or foreign interference? They never explained either of them. It was just,
Yep.
oh yeah, he was guilty of something, so we had to get rid of him because Mark wanted the seat. But here's a guy who's telling people to turn people into China, and
Yep.
Mark Carney was afraid to
Hmm.
say anything about it. And Paul Chang eventually pulled the plug.
Yep.
I personally believe the reason Paul Chang pulled the plug is he realized it was going to get worse, not better.
Hmm.
And I think China wanted him to pull the plug because it was bad publicity for China the longer this lasted. But to get back to my point, Sammy, here they are. They got the liberals on the ropes with Paul Chang. And what did the conservatives do? They start going after their own people for putting conspiracy theories on the internet. And not only does that totally refocus the attention of the media
Yep.
from Carney and Paul Chang, it angers the conservative base. And
Yes.
how do I know that? Well, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party, and I haven't been for many, many years. I don't belong to any party. I think they're the party that's going to the only chance we have of not having Mark Carney.
Hmm.
But how do I know the conservative base was upset? Because I was upset. I can tell you that I talked to so many people
Yeah.
who said, "What are they doing this for? Why are they purging the nomination at
Yeah.
this point in the race?" It was absurd.
Yeah, yeah, it is crazy what's going on with them. But so let me ask you one point with respect to like foreign interference. Like we talked about a lot, and you particularly highlighted this very much. Foreign interference. Like we are once again coming back. Like as Paul Ching, he could be one of those 11 or 12 MPs. But should we expect like this? Like this topic will be reopened when the parliament resume like next month after the election, or this foreign interference like it is over.
God forbid if Mark Carney is elected prime minister. And if he is, it will be over. That's the last you're ever going to hear about it because Mark Carney knows all about foreign interference. He is foreign interference. Everything about Mark Carney is foreign interference. From his constant promotion of China and the Chinese yuan as the universal currency to going to China and begging the central banks for a loan for his
Mm-hmm.
company. He
Yep.
is in China's pocket. And we know he met now. Blacklock's report had a story out this week that he met with the mayor of Beijing to lobby the
Yes.
mayor of Beijing
Mm-hmm.
just before he decided to run for the liberal leadership. So foreign interference, Mark Carney is foreign interference. Mark Carney's campaign slogan should not be Canada strong, it should be China strong. And or China first. That's
Mm-hmm.
what Mark Carney's all about. So you're never going to hear another peep about foreign interference. And frankly, it doesn't seem to be a popular issue amongst any of the parties, which is unfortunate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but like, should we expect another foreign interference in this election where China or Iran or maybe India or other some countries would push their citizen to vote for liberal or another party other than conservative?
Oh, definitely, because they've done it in the last two. Of course, China is working to elect its candidates, and I think those are liberal candidates,
Hmm.
especially in the Greater Toronto area.
Yep.
And so, yes, of course, there's foreign interference going on right now, and there's nobody's even talking about it. But if it went on for the last two elections and probably before that,
Mhm.
it's going on right now. There's no question in my mind that foreign interference is alive and well in Canada. And the exception of some investigative journalists that I respect very much, like Sam Cooper,
Yep.
nobody is talking about this at all,
You
and
bet.
certainly not the politicians. Have you heard the Conservatives talk about it during the campaign?
No.
Not a word. No.
Yeah, and also like they are like so Mark Carney recently visited CBC headquarter, I believe, gave an interview to CBC Radio, and he mentioned that CBC is like underfunded. Like we need to fund more. And Pierre Poulier, on the other hand, is saying that he would defund the CBC. So where do you stand? Are like Canadians buying what Carney is saying or Pierre Poulier?
Well, Polyev was always ahead on the numbers by saying defund the CBC. I think he still would be. We haven't done polling lately on that.
Mhm.
But to suggest that we need the CBC for national unity or Canadian content, that is absolutely insane. It's a stupid thing to say. When's the last time Mark Carney turned on his television? There's literally hundreds of stations available. Everybody now has hundreds of stations available. Nobody just has 12 or 13 stations. I mean, everybody's got hundreds of stations available, and many of them are Canadian content. And most of them are privately owned. And there's stations about Canadian history. There's Canadian comedy. There's Canadian drama. There are Canadian movies, and
Mhm.
they're all being done by the private sector. The CBC was created at a time when where there's very little Canadian media infrastructure. And that was back in 1935.
Yeah.
That was like 90 years ago when the CBC was created. So it's irrelevant today. The CBC is redundant as something we need for national unity. All it does is purvey state propaganda in many cases, and not always. There's some good reporters at CBC. In fact, they're so damn good they could be doing their job for a private sector company, and the CBC does quality news at times to a point where they could be supported only by the private sector instead of $1.3 billion of taxpayer money. So I don't buy the argument that CBC is in any way required to keep Canada together, to create Canadian content, or that they do something that's just so special nobody else does it. There's all kinds of Canadian content, especially now. Your Canadian content right now. And does Mark Carney even is he even aware of that? I mean, you're
Right.
creating Canadian content on YouTube and on X, on other social media platforms. That's all Canadian content. It's being viewed by Canadians.
Yep.
So what is he talking about? Why do we have to spend billions of dollars on the CBC? Because in the end, it's a state broadcaster that owes its money, owes its living to the government, and that's dangerous because when push comes to shove, the CBC will back the government every time.
But as you said, like it is a state broadcaster. It always like says what PMO like says. Like PMO dictates, maybe dictates. I would say. But did this happen like during Harper era too, or it is just happening in the liberals time?
Well, I wrote a policy paper on this about 15 years ago now. Yeah, probably about 15 years ago about the history of the CBC and it's how tendentious it is, how biased it is. And that wasn't my reason, my ultimate reason for advocating privatization. This was like 10 years before Pierre Paul even started talking about it. My reason was that CBC is quite able to look after its own affairs. It doesn't need the money because it can do the job without government funding. But if when I looked at the biases, it wasn't just the government. It was chronically moving the news, nuancing the news in a liberal way. So it's like there's the bureaucracy. It's like the deep state gone wild with CBC. That's the only way to describe it. It's not so much the government, it's power. It's the bureaucrats who run the CBC, not the journalists. The journalists don't run CBC. It's
Yeah.
the corporate bosses, the government corporate bosses, the bureaucrats who run CBC. They are the deep state. They've been there for decades. They have woke liberal ideology, and they push that on the CBC, and they direct their media reporters, editors to go in that direction.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Like so should we expect anytime soon this CBC would be privatized? Like, but why they don't privatize privatize it? Like we know, like many other things were privatized. Why they are keeping this CBC?
They're keeping the CBC because it's useful for them, just like they're subsidizing more media.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the Bill C-18, which essentially extorts money from social media, largely Meta, Google, that is that took effect just days before the election call. So now all of this money being extorted from social media like Google is going to mainstream media in addition to the subsidies they're already getting. So the government is buying and paying for the national media. The CBC, they've always had in their pocket. So there's no desire on the part of liberals to change the status quo. If Polyev backs away from this, and I was very disappointed he backed away on Radio Canada as being part of this. He said, oh, well, Radio Canada can stay. The status quo can stay. That was a dumb thing to do. That was a dumb separation to make. I don't know why he did that, except to appeal to votes in Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
But at least he's still talking about privatizing, defunding the CBC. And if he does that, it will mean that he's serious about a conservative agenda. It will send a message out that if there is a new sheriff in town, as I always said about Donald Trump replacing Joe Biden.
Mm-hmm.
If he doesn't do it, the conservatives will feel and will have been betrayed. So it's absolutely essential he follows through on this. And if that's the only thing Polyev was promising this election, I would be out there saying, I hope he wins rather than Mark Carney, because we've got to get rid of this albatross around her neck.
Yep. Yeah. But this, like Pierre Polier was like he put out a tweet like and a video on his social media platform, like cut the bureaucracy. Like they. So Pierre Polier is been talking this cutting the bureaucracy for since he won the a leadership race, but we are not hearing much about like cutting their salary. Like there is not a single MP or a minister or prime minister himself did not say a word or as they are receiving a pay hike on every April pass. Should we expect something like that? They would cut their salary or freeze it?
Yeah, right. That's they love to talk about waste in government.
Yeah,
Love and the conservatives are the worst hypocrites about this. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There's nobody worse, but they won't talk about April 1st every year, and they get an automatic pay raise. Are they really worth the money they're getting? I think it's arguable. There's a
yep,
lot of people in the private sector not getting anywhere near that, and they work
yep.
just as hard, if not harder.
Hmm.
So I that really gets me when I see this every year, and it's like, well, we deserve it. We deserve it, and that's really what they're saying. That this tacit agreement with it, and they're not really serious about r- vast reform when they can't start with themselves. So
Hmm.
I find that to be a real source of hypocrisy.
Yep. Okay. Let's jump to Quebec. Like Carney says that like he's not going to talk about law, which was like Bill 21. Now I think it is law, like which prohibit the like government official to wearing their religious symbols. But it seems like easy taking precaution. I think you remember when Trudeau was asked about this one back in 2021. He says the if it is in the court, so I cannot speak on this. Like they are always taking precaution when it comes to Quebec or Quebecer issue. So how would you see, like, and like particularly with Carney's French skill, like it is very low. It could be it could be worse than my English, like maybe he cannot speak as fluent French as I speak, like English, like which is not my mother tongue. But
Uh,
like so how is going to perform in the debate, and how much it would influence on Quebecers vote on April 28th?
well, I can't see Carney going through with this in the French language debate. He's going
Hmm.
to be completely destroyed by everybody else. His French is not good. He's okay at reciting lines,
Hmm.
but he's not good at thinking on his feet. Just witnessed the episode where the heckler in the crowd brought up
Yeah.
Jeffrey Epstein, and he was got people thought he was chanting satanic verses because it was supposed to be he was saying it was so bad. It was so bad. But that's
Hmm.
Mark Carney on his feet talking French. He doesn't do very well. So I can't see him participating in this debate because it's going to kill him. And a lot of people are telling me, a lot of people I interviewed this week are telling me that he won't participate in the English language debate
Wow.
either because he's got nothing to lose.
Hmm.
Why would he want to do that? Because he's not a great debater. And I find that hard to believe because I think, well, my God, he's got to go to one. And it's, it would be unprecedented for the prime minister of the time not to participate in a leaders debate. So I'll be surprised. I think he'll go in the English one, but I don't see him going through in the French one. He really has too much to lose for that. But the amazing thing, though, Sammy, you look at the numbers in Quebec.
Hmm.
The Liberals are in first place. They're
Yep.
over the they're above the block and they're taking support from the block.
Block.
So why is it when a guy who speaks lousy French is appealing to Quebecers? I mean, it hasn't happened since John Diefenbaker in 1957, who spoke very lousy French.
Wow, this is crazy. So, how much this leaders' debate could influence voters who are not decided voter? Would like if any leader perform better, like they can take chunk of votes from like undecided voters.
Well, generally debates can be very decisive. They are in the United States, as in certainly throughout history. You can cite debates that actually won elections for presidents, or at least were very, very important to election victories. And I think in Canada you can do the same thing. I think Brian Mulroney, when he faced off with John Turner in 1984 over, I think it was a Senate appointments, which makes you laugh because Brian Mulroney was just as bad at patronage as John Turner ever was. But he had John Turner under oath by saying, "You had a choice, sir. You could have said no." And that clip was played over and over and over again. And
Mm-hmm.
and there's John Turner, wiping his brow, saying, "I had no choice. This is what Trudeau left me." And Mulroney, "You had a choice, sir. You had a choice," and it was very effective. So this potentially could be Pierre Poilievre's last chance
Mm-hmm.
if things don't go better in the next couple of weeks. And I hope and pray they do for him. But this could be his last chance to take it. And if he totally demolishes Mark Carney, and don't be polite. Go
Mm-hmm.
for the jugular. Talk about the China and talk about Epstein. Why is his wife in Epstein's contact list? Why are you sitting around at the farm with Ghislaine Maxwell? Go for the jugular. Poilievre's got nothing to lose.
Yep.
And this is why every day on my Substack, on my broadcast, and anywhere else I'm writing, I'm talking about Mark Carney and China. I'm talking about Mark Carney and his corrupt past as a central banker, and he's a globalist, and he's in China's pocket. And this is what Poilievre needs to be doing every day. because Mark Carney is many things, but I didn't realize he was an accomplished actor. And he's better than Justin Trudeau. He
Yep.
really is. Justin Trudeau always looked a little melodramatic. Always looked like he was a little bit coming apart at the seams. Mark Carney has been able to convince a lot of Canadians that he's just a moderate, small C conservative running under the large L liberal banner. And
Mhm.
he's not too far from Pierre Poilievre, except he's just a little more experienced with the private sector, and he knows the real world, and Polyev doesn't. He spent his whole life in government, so Polyev doesn't understand the real world. He's done an excellent job of coming across as a moderate, even though this man is a radical. He's a Marxist Leninist. His whole outlook has been communist, Marxist, far left socialist. Everything about Mark Carney is toxic. He's a globalist. He's in China's pocket. And Polyev needs to bring that out about Mark Carney. Mark Carney has been a great job of pretending he's net zero. Well, we'll think about that now. And pipelines, oh, I like pipelines now. And I'm not buying any of this. Just like I think the carbon tax will be back with
Mhm.
a fervor
Yeah. Yep.
as soon as if he becomes prime minister.
Mhm. Yeah, like it means now liberals are celebrating this carbon tax. Oh, we removed this carbon tax, but who brought it in? Like these liberals, right?
That's it. And it's not. They haven't taken it away. They've just reduced the price
Mm-hmm.
for the
Yeah.
election
Mm-hmm.
because they have to legislate it out of existence, and they couldn't do
Yeah.
that without bringing Parliament back. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure you know that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like, let's talk about PPC. PPC is down in the polls, but it is competing with the Greens, and but they were kicked out from the leaders' debate. It seems like, but I need to ask you. Like, I put it on X as well. Like, is leaders' debate commission being dictated by a PMO?
I begin to wonder because the rules change
Mm-hmm.
constantly. It's supposed to be independent of the Prime Minister's office,
Yeah.
but they keep changing the rules so the PPC is not allowed to participate.
Mm-hmm.
And the last time I spoke to Maxime Bernier on my show, we talked about this, and I I think Maxime's doing a great job of getting out and talking to conservatives and going on podcasts, which is what Polyev should be doing. It's
Yep.
another reason Polyev's behind. He's not going on podcasts, shows like yours and mine and others, or the huge shows in the States who have
Yep.
invited him on. Some of the
Mm-hmm.
biggest shows in the U.S. who get numbers that the CBC doesn't get in 2 weeks. They get
Yep.
every day.
Mm-hmm.
Polyev has hung up on them, not him personally, but his staff has hung up on people like uh, Patrick Bet David, for instance,
Yep.
said the other day he called Polyev's office twice. His people hung up on him twice. So I mean
Wow.
that is outrageous, and he needs to be doing that. He needs to be doing more of that, and so I really, I don't know how Mark Carney can come out of this if Polyev is unleashed, if he's allowed to be himself, and that's what he needs to do.
Mm-hmm. And what are they afraid of, like for not letting Maxime Bernier on the debate?
Well, that's a good question because Maxime would have been excellent in the French language debate because his French is obviously superior to
Pierre Poulier.
Pierre Poilievre's and Mark Carney's if he's there, and and I think he's more than the intellectual equal of Blanchette
Mm-hmm.
or Blanchet of the bloc. So I think it would have been an excellent opportunity to hear from Max, but I feel badly for Max because I consider Max a friend, and if you put PPC policy against CPC policy, I tend to agree more with the PPC policy.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And my heart is with the PPC in many cases, in many areas, many days. And my heart is with Maxime Bernier. But they ain't going to win the election with 1 to 2% of the vote. There's no way they're going to win this election. And there's only one party that's poised to beat the Liberals, and that's the Conservative Party of Canada. So I don't think this is a good time to be hoping you win 20 or 30 seats or that you make a breakthrough. This is not the election for that because Poilievre needs every seat to stop Mark Carney. Now, Poilievre might turn out to be a huge disappointment, like other conservative leaders have turned out to be a huge disappointment. But I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't agree with a lot of the things he says or doesn't say, but I do agree with a lot of the things he said. And I think he's the only hope Canadians have of avoiding a catastrophe under Mark Carney, who will destroy this country beyond redemption. And he'll finish off the job Justin Trudeau started, which was to destroy Canada and to bring it into the globalist orbit and to fracture the economy beyond belief.
Mhm. And should we expect another revolt within Conservative Party? Maybe it would be divided into two party if they cannot form a government, is what happened back in
Yeah, it's
1996.
it's it's very will history repeat itself and the conservative the progressive conservative party imploded and gradually died, withered away over the years, and replaced first by Reform, then by Canadian Alliance, then by Conservative Party. And I went through it all, and I was there working on the Hill through most of that
Mhm.
process, or very involved in politics at that point in my life. So I went through that whole painful process from Reform to the new Conservative Party of Canada, and it was painful. And I don't know if people have the patience for that anymore, or if it's just going to be the total disruption of Canada, the potential secession of parts of Canada, the separation. That could be more plausible than going through this again, or the Conservative Party imploding again and perhaps being replaced by the People's Party again. I don't know if that's going to happen. I don't think people have the patience anymore, and I don't think we have the time. I think if Mark Carney gets the levers of power as an elected prime minister with a 4-year mandate, this country's in serious trouble. And he represents. I hate to use existential threat. It's overused, misused, but he does represent an existential threat to this country because of where he comes from and where he wants to bring Canada. And I don't think we have 4 years to navel gaze and to think, well, what are we going to do, conservatives? Are we going to back Maxime and the People's Party, or are we going to hope the Conservative Party of Canada can repair itself? And I don't know. I think it's going to be more of an implosion of the party and perhaps of the country, which is and you say that's impossible. Canada's been around for since 1867. Well, nothing is impossible these days. Things. History marches so fast, and I find this with this campaign. It's difficult to keep up with what's happening. It's just to keep up with how many people the conservatives have kicked out of nominations is difficult enough. But just keeping up with this campaign, it is moving so fast. And it's because of the internet. It's because of social media.
Yep.
And the people running Poilievre's campaign still think it's 2000, where all we had was cable news,
Mm.
and we didn't have people on the internet 24/7, and
Yep.
we do now.
Mhm.
It's literally impossible not to talk about this election
Yep.
constantly. It's everywhere all the time. So that's the difference. And if you're not competing in that environment, if you still think it's about getting on CBC so 300 people can see you that night, it's not. It's not about that anymore. The world has changed and everything has changed with it.
Okay. So what's your last take? Like, if you want to share anything I did not discuss with you, or you would like to share something to the voters or Canadians?
Well, as I said, I think the important thing is that Pierre Poilievre needs to shift his focus to change, change, change. And as Bill Clinton illustrated so well in 1992, you stick to something people understand and you keep repeating it. And that's the best way and probably the only way to win an election. And you have to, what people remember now about Polyev is, oh yeah, well, didn't he go off about Trump or no, I thought he was pro-Trump, and it's all about Donald Trump. And the liberals planned it that way. They made this election about Donald Trump and then
Mm.
tarred Pierre Polyev with being pro-Trump.
Yep.
And so he's had to fight back twice as hard as being anti-Trump. But Polyev needs to focus on the change, the need for change, the need to get back to common sense in this country. And I can't say this with enough passion. The country is on the verge of collapse. And so many European nations are on the verge of collapse too. The UK could could be on the verge. Their central bank is on the verge of collapse. We need we need some action and we need some direction out of this conservative campaign that actually focuses on things people understand. And Polyev has got to get back to a positive conservatism. That's what I like to call it, the kind exemplified by Ronald Reagan, where you talk about freedom, liberty, the ability to work and to provide for your family and get government out of our lives. That has got to be stopped. And that's Polyev should have said, why do we want more government in our lives? Spending
Yep.
more for the CBC, we want less government in our lives. Get out of my life. The government doesn't know best. The government doesn't know what misinformation, disinformation is. All it thinks that is something they disagree with. The government needs to get out of our lives, and Polyev needs to get back to basic conservative principles because that's what energizes, that's what excites people. And that's why they'll go out and vote for him on April 28th. They're not going to go out and vote for him if they just think, well, he's the second choice to negotiate with Donald Trump. But I hear Mark Carney's better. And that's a losing proposition for Polyev. He's got to change the narrative. He's got to change the theme of this election.
Okay. Thank you so much, David, once again, for taking your time and the patience you have. Like you always talk directly to Canadians and tell them what is right, and always share the other side of the story, and also supporting an independent journalist like myself who is struggling at this time. I highly appreciate it, sir. And because of you, I monetize my channel. And thanks to all you viewers and particularly your support, I could not make it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Okay, hopefully, see you next week again to talk with you more. And it is election season, and we have more to come.
You bet. It's more to come every day. So we'll have
Yeah,
plenty to talk
yeah,
about next week, Sammy.
yeah, yeah. Thank you. Take care, sir. Thank you very much.
You
Have a
too.
good weekend. Yeah, thank you.
You
Bye.
too. Bye bye.